Football Manager has released what it describes as a major update. It's got this big shiny thing on Steam, and it's the culmination of their plan that they announced to do regular updates to the game for a month to get it up to standard. And this was necessary, because if you remember, when the game came out, the reviews on Steam were like 23% positive. And over the next month, it is worth mentioning, those reviews have crept up to 35% positive in the recent reviews section and 31% positive overall, which is obviously still ridiculously low, but it is at least headed in the right direction. So has Football Manager 26 been fixed? But to understand where we were, we got to go back to November 6th, which is when the release update, or what was kind of the release update, came out. Remember, the game came out on November 4th, but it wasn't actually released. They just removed the beta watermark because of the way they explained it. They'd done too many updates in the beta, and they'd already sent copies of that game to other platforms, and it has to be the same release on every platform or whatever. They botched it. And they botched it under the guise of, we just wanted to push out so many updates during the beta, but they were really just freaking out and trying to do hot fixes because the game just had so many issues with it that people couldn't really enjoy playing it. This is why the reviews ended up where they were. So the first update reflected this, but I've assembled a handy dandy list just in case we forget where the game was at when it was actually released, so that we can kind of compare that to where it is now. And I filed these away in two different categories. One of the categories is like great example of how the game came out and it wasn't where it needed to be. And the other category is actually an example of adding in features that used to exist in the game and then coming back again. And this is a trend that I'm very worried about when it comes to the game itself, because I'm also a little confused with it. I appreciate the fact that these features are being added back into the game because it shows that Sports Interactive is listening to what we have to say about everything that's going on, but it also it creates this concern that Football Manager is basically manufacturing new features almost. But in the first category, which, like I was saying, demonstrates how far we've come, they had numerous text overlaps and misalignment fixes, which is something they just detailed. My personal favorite, manually scouting a player will now correctly delegate an appropriate scout. And there are just certain things that are such a fabulous example that the game was just not play tested enough, because manually scouting a player is a very common thing to have happen. Having text overlaps and misalignments going through different screens, I mean, at the very least, you should be able to click through the game and kind of have everything work before it's released. New Gen's portraits will now appear during match broadcast graphics. Like going into a match, if you had a New Gen, you just wouldn't have the New Gen's portrait appear in the match graphics before the match. But like, how do you discover that that's a problem? You go into a match with a New Gen and the faces just aren't showing up there. You go, oh, maybe that's something that we should be able to address. One that drove everybody absolutely insane, one of the best examples of the fact that the game just hadn't been played enough. Set piece attributes are now visible when setting set piece penalty takers. The scouting finished message and the intermediary suggestion headline will now display the name of the player. They didn't contain the name of the player before, which was a great user experience boosting sort of thing. If you scouted a player, it just says scouting finished, but you don't see the name of the player. If you want to know why, when the game was released, the reviews were so bad, those are just a few examples from that change list on the first of what would eventually be 4 updates up to this major update that just dropped a few days ago that shows why people were so frustrated about the game and why me and a lot of other people just felt like they'd put out a game that wasn't finished. But now to the stuff that they've added in that used to exist. Added a preference option to allow users to customize attribute colors, and added 1.5 times match speed during highlights and 4 times match speed between highlights, just giving more modability to the actual speed that the match is played at. That is, those are two different things that allowed Football Manager players to all play the game so differently. And it also felt like, because they clearly had rushed this game out, that they had not given Football Manager players the same opportunity to mod the game to make themselves comfortable, which is a hugely positive thing about all of the other Football Manager games that have ever been released, from the skins to the fact that you could create custom columns and all that stuff. You could rearrange your match day visuals, so you had different information displayed and all that stuff. And that stuff is still not necessarily available in the game right now. And then there's, fortunately, a third section of things, which is actually just making changes to try to improve the game based off of user complaints. And that is something they have done as well, not just by adding back in things that existed before, but even in the original update, they had added a preference to turn off alter the speed of UI transitions between screens. Right? The big issue a lot of people had was, well, hey, it takes too long to get to these other screens. So now you have a preference You know, the ability to adjust the amount of load time. They're almost acknowledging the fact that it isn't able to load fast enough for it to feel super smooth, but at least you can load into it faster. You can go there faster and make the AI itself feel more smooth and just kind of wait for the pages to populate a little bit. And that was a genuine response. And that is what some of these changes are in a positive direction, a genuine response to players experiencing the new Football Manager. What's really unfortunate about the process that I'm kind of going over in this video is that the majority of changes don't fit into that category because they've had to spend so much time putting out fires, right? Because what we would have loved to have seen, and I've talked to a couple of other YouTubers about this in roundtables and stuff, is I would love to see what their vision of this game was. And with these sorts of changes, we're able to work our way towards that, right? Now, once we get all of these things knocked out, right? This is just the first update. Obviously, there's been 3 more updates since this, including the major one. Once they get all of those bugs fixed and add things back into the game that people clearly want and never wanted removed in the first place, like having more variability in the match speed, then we can start to make the changes like, let's alter the speed of the UI transitions. Hey, the way you built the UI, it's too slow, people don't like it, and there needs to be an option to be able to speed up the UI transitions. Now we can start adjusting the actual vision they have for the game towards what we want as people that play the game, which is obviously going to be a ton of different things, but still. The next update came out a week later, and these are coming out a few days before they actually are released on the public beta track, which a ton of people have been playing on because you get access to the new changes early. I've been playing on the base game like a pleb, I guess, just waiting for those updates to hit. The November 13th update did bring a couple more super fun ones that showed you how many bugs still needed to be patched, like the agreed playing time column just wasn't populating. Still, at this point, the game's been out for 10 days, like full release, and there, if you put up the agreed playing time column, which is one of the most important columns on the squad screen for me, to be able to visualize the agreed playing time of all the players on my team, it just wouldn't fill up, right? The arrange friendly did not appear as intended on the opening fixture screen when you opened it for the first time. Another example of a type of update that, like, if you play the game for 5 minutes, that's the sort of thing that gets you really bad reviews on Steam. That's the sort of thing that makes people feel like they're not playing a game that's fully fleshed out. Change withdraw transfer offer action buttons will now function correctly immediately after user makes an offer. If you remember, you'd make a transfer offer, and if you went back to try and change it immediately, you couldn't. You had to advance a day, and maybe you didn't figure this out. I didn't figure it out the first time. You'd have to advance a day and then go back, and you'd be able to change it. Fixed a soft lock when selecting off of the move to other club list on the in-game editor, which moving a player to another club is probably, if I had to imagine, the #1 thing the in-game editor is used for. So I pulled that one just because it was a great example of having not playtested the in-game editor, which doesn't surprise me because they were still struggling to get like serious issues fixed with the game. And just so I don't forget to mention it, every single one of these updates literally starts, significant stability fixes and crashing fixes. So that's a part of every single one of these updates. And while I have not actually crashed once while playing FM26, I have heard obviously from the community that is around the streams, which I, of course, am streaming on Twitch all the time and Zealand Live on YouTube if you don't feel like using Twitch, is that the crashing issue has been addressed massively, which is good. Not 100%, obviously, and it's kind of impossible to always address crashing 100%, but it has been massively addressed. The stability of the game has improved significantly over the course of these 4 updates, over the plan of a month that they laid out to try and fix the game. And then there's a really terrifying one when I was reading November 13th, because I think this strikes at the core of why a game like Football Manager needs to be polished to a certain extent, is acting on opposition instructions advice will now function correctly. This means until November 13th, 9 days after the full release of the game, there was a significant identifiable issue with the players and the way they reacted to opposition instructions you set in the game. The game's called Football Manager. How you play, how you have your players match up with the players on the other team is a really important part of the game. Opposition instructions. And they're just the idea that they're not functioning correctly. Football Manager as a video game needs to create trust. It has to create trust because the match engine is a black box. You can't go into the combat log and look up exactly what happened to make sure there wasn't a bug there. And so when you see something like this in there, that's scary. And people are not going to have nearly as much faith in the hidden components of the game that determine whether you win or lose matches if they see bugs everywhere else, if they see things not working everywhere else. And this kind of confirms that suspicion in some ways that some of the stuff behind the curtain also is suffering from bugs, which I suppose that's not surprising, but that was still scary, right? And then there's the November 21st update. All of these, this is what they look like, by the way. If you want to read the entire change lists, you can go to Steam and just go to the updates section, click see all, and you can just read all of the change lists as exhaustively as you want. I have. It's a fun time. The third update was released, at least posted, on November 25th. This is the third of the 4 updates that we got, and it made significant adjustments to the match engine. And this was a better sign, right? Obviously, there's still a lot of fly swatting going on down here with the change list, right? They're still fixing various things, like you can't load a tactic within a match, right? That just didn't work before, but now all of a sudden you're going to be able to do it. And there's goofy things like in-match opposition instructions now correctly reflect any substitutions that have been made, right? This is an observation I was making consistently, that if you went into your opposition instructions during a match, right, it would say predicted starting lineup at the top and then not change as substitutions had been made. So you'd have to set the opposition instructions per position. I mean, that's the sort of thing, honestly, the closest I ever got to not wanting to play this game anymore was because of that. Because I felt like, well, now I'm just watching a football simulator. I'm not able to affect the game in the way that I want to affect the game as the coach. But the fixes to the match engine mean, honestly, that they're feeling a little more comfortable with where the rest of the game is at. Because the match engine was the one shining part of it. I mean, it's what they brag about. They put out public statements talking about how, a much higher percentage of time in the game is being spent in the match engine. People are really excited to play the matches. Of course, the downside of that is that people are not really into the other parts of the game as much, and the other parts of the game outside the match that's the meat and potatoes, right? If the match is the dessert, the meat and potatoes, the real meal is everything you do leading up to the match, and that's where Football Manager should probably want you to spend your time. But now if they're stepping into fixing the match engine stuff, honestly, that's more normal Football Manager updates. If you remember past Football Manager updates, by the time we've gotten to update 3 here, we're going into the match engine and going, well, counterattacking defense is terrible, or defending against long throws is terrible, or this one type of goal is way too common, like frequency of players shooting at the near post. Like, okay, they're scoring way too many goals from the near post. I love how the way they changed that is we'll just make them shoot less instead of, making the goalkeepers and defenders handle those near post runs better. But early on in this game, if you had a fullback or a winger coming in at an angle, the defense would not close them down and they just bang it above the goalkeeper half the time, and it was an automatic goal machine. That has been removed from the game. That is not happening nearly as much anymore. It is still happening some. That avenue is still there, but your players will not take advantage of it nearly enough, and not in a way that is overly annoying in the match engine. There's just more squaring of the ball and more normal looking goal-scoring plays coming from your team. So those tweaks have definitely worked. Reactions to opposition dribbling, that has helped. There are not as many, at the beginning of the game when I was playing in the beta, it felt like your entire defense was on skates. You couldn't stop anybody. There was no way to play any defense at all. Tweaks made to the line defenders hold when they're in their own box is a positive, right? Because the general defensive logic of get between the guy with the ball and the goal just had been failing. Improved defenders' logic heading the ball, improved offensive players' logic when it came to their ability to counterattack. I like anything that says improving logic when it comes to the match engine. But like I was saying, these are updates that are not hugely out of place in old Football Manager. Right? The old Football Managers, they would spend, this kind of process fine-tuning the match engine, right? Because, hundreds of thousands of people would be playing the game and active on the forums and reporting issues that popped up with the match engine that you might not see in a simple playtest. That's not the same as like finding out that the opposition instructions don't work during a match, which is very obvious for anybody that plays the game for 5 minutes. But the tweaks that you can make when you get that kind of data aggregation and understanding of how the match engine's working and make the match engine work better for you. So I was very happy to see these changes, and that brings us to the big update. The major update. I do really just love the way they make it shiny. It's a 26.1, and it is huge. When you click on it, it doesn't look as huge because they gave you just a really short list on Steam. But if you actually hunt it down, this is the post on the forums with all of the different changes that have been made. There's significant database changes, like adjustments to the way MLS rules are working. They have it broken down into different sections. And obviously, if you're really interested in this sort of thing, game development, or just seeing if they've patched that one issue that's driving you particularly crazy, you're more than like, I would fully recommend checking this out. Hell, I'll link this page in the description so you don't have to go looking for it. I will only do that if the editors remind me that I said that in this video. I'll put the odds at 50-50. But I have obviously read the entire thing and pulled a couple of things that fit into those 3 categories. The first one is obviously things that I couldn't believe are still in the game. Those are still being patched. And I don't know, assuming, and I know that there are some that exist after this, I don't know if those are going to continue to be patched because according to the announcement, they were going to continuously update the game for the next month. I don't know if they're going to continue to do it after that, but they fixed an issue where floating floodlights appeared in nighttime matches when using tactical or dynamic sideline cameras. If you were playing a nighttime match and used certain camera angles, there would just be a bunch of lights floating at the top of your screen, like when you have your phone camera's a little smudged and you try and take a picture anywhere near lights, you know, they're just lights there. The wage budget payroll on tiles and widgets will now display in the correct weekly, monthly, and yearly format in line with user preferences. This was a hilarious thing for me because I've been playing this entire game, even though I use yearly wage, in half the game in different places, it would just be weekly. And don't even get me started on the in-game editor when it comes to that stuff, because the in-game editor would show me my budget in weekly pounds. I was doing yearly dollars. And then I could go into the budget and type in what I wanted it to be in yearly pounds, and then it would give it back to me in yearly dollars if I was working in the in-game editor. It was crazy. Users can now add players from their youth squads to their squad planner, which I put that in there just because I feel like if you can't add players from your youth squads into your squad planner, what is the point of the squad planner if not to map out like where those guys are going? The defensive line tile no longer appears twice in all instructions out of possession tab. So we are still at the point of this major update squashing very obvious visual bugs. Various search filters within the player database now function as intended. International caps, scouting knowledge, days since last scouted, player footedness, to name a few. So the scouting of players, which is an integral part of the game, there was a lot of lacking functionality there that I had run into multiple times in my save. And fixed an issue where you could register more players than required via the Ask Assistant to Pick option. Hilarious bug. You could ask your assistant to register the team and you would just get extra players into your registration. People found this pretty quickly. There were some issues with the in-game editor where they apparently finally were able to fix the button to allow registration at any time, which the in-game editor is really used for by the vast majority of people, to move players to different clubs and then have them be able to play. The fact that you couldn't allow registration at any time, let's say if I wanted to move Erling Haaland to my National League team just for fun, you couldn't register him if it wasn't in a transfer window when you did that. Even though you had the in-game editor, it didn't work. And then there is, in this major update, a large collection of things that have been added back into the game, that have been kind of reintroduced as features, which I'm still torn on. I like it because they're listening to us, they're giving us things that we like to have in the game, but also I'm looking at it as, okay, the biggest thing about this update, what did you hear? If you're involved in the online community of Football Manager when this update came out, shouts are back. They work the exact same as they did before, they just put them back into the game. They also re-enabled the ability to disable following other humans in online multiplayer. So if you do a network save, you were just forced to follow like news of what all of the other humans were doing at all times, and you couldn't turn that off, which if you play a network save, that's a feature that needs to be there. And then there were a couple things with the in-game editor that were also the same. Like they added the functionality to import, export attribute templates, which is a very key part of the in-game editor, to be able to go in and like, I'm gonna export this attribute template and bring it to somewhere else. That didn't exist in this version of the in-game editor, even though obviously it'd been around for a long time before. And it fixed the field for wages shows per week, regardless of the user settings. Yeah, I mean, I hope that's what I was talking about earlier when it comes to the editor, but I'm not even sure with the way that's worded. And then of course there are the updates to the way they actually want the game to work. And there's some good things to see here, but it's also a little troubling because they've once again put in tweaks to the frequency of players shooting at near post from tight angles. It's the exact same thing. They put in a couple of those things. They put in tweaks made to line defenders hold when defending their box, right? They've put a couple of those in there that were in the previous update. So they're tweaking around with the match engine even more. It's a good thing, obviously, but it also means that they didn't necessarily get it right the first time, and this is an ongoing process that I am worried might now not be ongoing. The all-timer here is they finally fixed an issue where the board would not offer human players contracts. This is a problem. I was on the Football Manager podcast not that long ago. Multiple people on that podcast talked about how they were just on month-to-month contracts with their clubs because they weren't getting offered a new contract. So completely immersion breaking, nonsense that they were able to fix, but that existed for the entirety of the month up to the major update. What is interesting is that from the November 25th update, every single one of these things in a different order, but with the exact same wording, has been included in the major update. I don't know if that's like a gotcha moment, or if that's just they're just trying to make this section look longer, or if that's common practice and that update that was a week ago is just, you know, like we're just balling that together and it's part of the major update. Because there is a lot more, obviously, on here that has gone into fixing the match engine as well. But there was one thing I saw that gave me great hope. The shortlist tile now updates in real time. This is an actual improvement to the game based off user experience. So we're starting to break through the clouds a little bit, see a little sunshine beaming down, you know, hair in the breeze type of moment where you go, oh. They're actually trying to make the game better instead of put out the fires, right? The forest fire might at least be under control. So have they fixed Football Manager 26 now? No, they haven't. And it was always going to be an impossible job to actually fix Football Manager 26 from the point that it was released in this first month. But there is going to come a time where they have to start working on the next game. That's the way that yearly game cycles work in the sports world. So I am worried in one direction that certain bugs will stay in the game, like the fact that sometimes when you make a transfer offer for somebody and it fails, you literally can't offer them another transfer. You just get soft locked on a screen like this, and me mauling while trying to figure out how to do that on my recent charity streams. But he's really good and I wanted to sign him. I understand that their goal was to basically make a game that didn't crash nearly as much so that people could at least go out and enjoy it and they didn't lose too much of their audience to then go into the next game. But now we're kind of out into the abyss. We don't really know what the plan is for updating Football Manager 26 outside of this. And the game has improved significantly. It has to be acknowledged that the game has improved significantly. From the stability stuff to the match engine feeling better to there being a less unfinished feel to the game, although there are still certain parts of the game like trying to go through league histories and stuff where it is just obviously not working. But as I've tried to show you going through all these updates, this month has been a fireman's brigade effort to go out and put out a forest fire around FM26, to solve the bugs that are game breaking, to solve the bugs that show you that there's an obvious issue with the game, to get certain things like opposition instructions to work correctly at all. And even though I am enjoying the game, and I am definitely, as somebody that plays the game a lot, enjoying it significantly more now than I was when it came out, it is still clear that this is not the full realized vision of what they'd hoped this game would be, and they are just kind of surviving. But we are starting to see more of that traditional Football Manager fine-tuning when it comes to these updates, instead of the, oh, you're just not getting a new contract from the club, let's take care of that instead. And that has to be considered a massive positive, because it needs to be acknowledged that the worst case scenario for these updates over the next month was far worse than where we are now, even though we haven't necessarily hit the best case scenario either. So I guess we've got an answer to one of our questions. While I was in Sweden for a few days for Nim's New Year's show, Football Manager released another update, so I guess they're going to continue to update the game. It's kind of more of the same. I went through all the patch notes after my intercontinental travel day. Pulled a couple of the more interesting ones. Some like playability stuff is still being fixed, like offers received on deadline day are now must respond. Honestly, that just kind of reminds me that there still is no deadline day process, so who the hell knows what's going on with that, or if they're going to win, they're going to add that back. The correct lineup will now display for opposition instructions during a match in December, like mid-December. Viewing past season results within the stages card now functions correctly. Huge for me, making YouTube videos and stuff. Loan players can no longer get recalled if the loan club has triggered the buy clause. So if you trigger the buy clause to buy a player, they could still recall the loans before, which is kind of crazy. I mean, look, obviously you would rather this stuff be on the fixed list than be still broken in the game. So it's good to see it here. And then there's some nice, like, oh, they're making the game better than it was. Tweaks made to ensure AI clubs don't make repeated loan offers for the same player. Yeah, but they're still smacking down these issues with a hammer here. But if you want to see the state of the game now, you can always come hang out on stream, on Twitch, or on the Zealand Live YouTube channel, and let's get back to doing fun stuff in Football Manager. We will learn how to live with the bugs that remain.